Thanks for that amazing introduction. I want to also thank Helen for her tireless work and many emails getting us prepared to come. Thanks for keeping us on task. And Lori DePreti Brown, thanks so much for inviting us. We're very, very grateful to be able to present this work and share it with you today. We don't have a lot of time, so what I'm going to do is give you a brief introduction of the national project that Lori just mentioned. And I want to talk about one of its origin points. So Linda and I have been collaborating on this project since roughly 2009 is when we did our first oral history related to the project. But really, if we're going to think about an origin for the project, it emerges from a tearful phone conversation in 2007. And I went back last night and found the email where she followed up with me on this. Linda had just attended this conference here. Maybe we can get a better view of it. It was a conference commemorating the IWY National Conference of Women that was established to set the agenda for American women to take to the UN for the next World Conference on Women. This followed a 1975 World Conference on Women in Mexico City, and it was really well known as the kind of major conference that brought American women together from all the states to determine what our platform on the status of women and the future of women was going to be. So it's an historic conference that happened in 1977. Linda decided to attend the event and called me afterwards because she was extremely distressed that there was this lack of representation. Indeed, there was some representation of women of color, and you can't read this, sorry, but it was very minimal, right? So Loretta Ross was there, Lupe Anguiano was there, but it didn't reflect, in Linda's opinion, because she went to Houston, as did I, as children, the diversity of that conference, the true diversity. And she sent me this email. So this is one of the origin points for the project. She said, we're rapidly disappearing from the historical consciousness of the women's movement. 30 years ago, we were not marginalized groups coming to the table of feminism, grateful for the gift of a voice from the white feminist majority. We came, as Marta Cotera describes, already battle-scarred, from the United Farm Workers, the Chicano Moratorium, Comisión Femenil Nacional, and the Raza Unida Party in California and Texas. We came, as Loretta Ross described in her panel presentation, from coalitions like the Black Women's Alliance, and that was evolved from the Black nationalist movement and birthed in the abolitionist movement and coming of age in the civil rights movement. We came to that meeting in Houston as commissioners, presidentially appointed, leading significant numbers of minority women in the fight for feminist equality. We left Houston with a new collective identity as women of color, proud in the understanding that through sisterhood our contributions were just as vital, just as important, just as necessary to the success of the plan of action. Sorry, it took us too fast. Now, 30 years later, in the hope that some portion of that experience would be recognized, to feel like a lone voice, to see a lone voice in Lupe Anguiano, who was also on the panel with Loretta Ross, as the entire representation of Latinas, makes me wonder, how do we let this happen? And then it makes me realize that we are the generation that has to do something about it. Our mothers, grandmothers, and great-grandmothers that found voice in social movements tell us that we are the legacy scholars, children of these activists that dreamed and fought and sacrificed everything in the expectation that life would be better for us. It was, it is, but now what? And so this is difficult to see, but these are images of Chicanas, one of whom is my mother. Let's see if I can come in, presenting at IWY. And then this cracks me up. This is, clearly my mother had sent the National IWY's office in Washington a letter asking them, like, why aren't you reaching out to Chicanas and other women of color? And they sent her back this very formal and nice letter saying, many thanks for your letter. We're glad that you're interested. We'll be sending you materials promptly. And if you, maybe you can see, you know, this is, this is the list of IWY presiding officers, and at the top of that list is Alan Alda. Right, so this was really, and there's only a few women of color on this list. These are materials, these are the kind of materials, along with oral histories, that we've been gathering for this digital project, to reinscribe that history that Linda called for. So one of the questions, though, about this recovery project that was very central was that we didn't want this to just be an archival recovery project that would end up in a library, right, that would end up kind of locked away someplace for scholars to use to interpret history. We wanted to rethink the archive. And some of the central questions we asked was, how do we recover our feminist past in a way that respects its liberatory possibilities? So is an archival, or can an archival project be something more than a scholarly enterprise? Can it be an example of feminist praxis? And if so, how does that change the way we're doing it? The question is there a feminist practice of archival recovery? And if so, what would that look like? Who does it serve? What audiences does it speak to? What legacies does it honor? And how does it change the way we do our work as scholars? Can an archive, for example, be reimagined as a site of exchange where new knowledges are made through an encuentro with the past? This word encuentro in Spanish is a little different from encounter. An encuentro is a collective act of community organizing, right? An encuentro is coming together from various constituencies to either make art, to make politics, to make social change, right? So when we say encuentro, I'm playing on that idea of both encounter with the past, between the past and present, and also political sort of synthesis that happens in that encounter. I showed this poster because it was a poster that was made for Chicanas Pro Raza Unida. Raza Unida Party was a radical third party in Texas and California, Chicano Party. And an artist made this poster for the Mujeres March to resist police brutality in Far Texas. So this is the first Chicana poster that was made for that organization. And that's where we draw our name from, this idea of Chicana feminist praxis as engaged praxis. So I want to talk a little bit about the project. And as I said, the project has been ongoing since 2009. In 2009, we took our first troop of undergraduates down to Texas. We stayed with my mother. We interviewed women in her network who were all members of the Raza Unida Party, who were very active in party politics. In fact, we interviewed a woman, Alma Canales, who was 21, and she ran on the Raza Unida Party ticket as lieutenant governor of Texas in 1972. She was actually 9 years under the age where she could run for that position, but they ran her anyway, and they garnered actually 20% of the vote in Texas. One of the reasons why the Raza Unida Party was very effective in Texas, we learned on that first research trip, is because because women were involved at the grassroots level. And so they were registering whole families to vote, people who hadn't voted before, grandmas, aunties, moms. And so they were able to, their ground game was very good. We hear about ground game now with Bernie Sanders, right? These were the original ground gamers. Right. This is a really interesting point, right? So a lot of the materials we collect, I show to my students because they're handwritten, they're typed. When women exchanged books, for example, or sold books, they did it at conferences, not through Amazon, right? Or sometimes my mother's, parts of our archive include like order forms that women would fill out at conferences for some of the books that she sold on women of color. So it's a very interesting material culture universe. So the main objectives of the Chicana por mi Raza project, and it started as a Chicana por mi Raza digital humanities project, then it turned into digital oral histories project. Now we're calling it the Chicana por mi Raza Digital Memory Collective. And that's important. I'm going to talk about why that's really important. So the main objectives are to collect and preserve the material culture, the archival history. Much of this material culture and archival history. Oh, I'm staying away from the mic. I'm so sorry. I know they're recording. So much of this material culture and archival history exists in women's basements, under their beds, in their offices, attics, basements. So, recovering this material is really, really important because it's in danger of being permanently lost. But another part of this recovery project is the memory part, right? So when we go in and interview women, we always ask them if they have things they'd like to share for us to scan. And so the idea is to collect their stories and their memories of their social justice activism and at the same time document their mementos, right, their memorial objects. But also collaboration is really central to the project, and I'm going to talk about that a bit. And education has always been at the center. So that exactly that cross-generational interface that Linda was calling for. So the primary objective, as I said, from the very beginning, was to collect and digitize oral histories. So all of our oral histories are filmed usually by Linda to very high standards so that they can be used either as documentary evidence for scholars, as teaching tools for teachers who'd like to include this history, but also by documentarians who want to create new documentaries. I should also say that in the conversation that Linda had after this email, she said, well, you've got to write a book. And I was like, well, you've got to make another movie, because she'd already made a movie about the Chicana caucus of the NWPC. And we realized we'd have to live multiple lifetimes to write all the books and movies that needed to be made. And so we decided instead to collect the resources from which all of those books and movies could be made by other people. And so a really central part of this is an ethical commitment not to collect an archive and be the sole interpreters of that archive and to thereby burnish our CVs or whatever, and advance in our careers, but rather to create the conditions of production for, tens of hundreds of women and men to collect this history and do that work. So the digital oral histories run between 2 to 4 hours in length, sometimes up to 6, and we have them uploaded in this digital collection. And maybe I can just show you what that looks like. Of course I have to log in, because I already did that, but it popped me out. So this digital collection is a platform that was developed by UIUC, and maybe, in the Q&A we can come back to that. But basically, here's a screenshot of it, right? And it organizes digital artifacts along with the oral histories, so that there will be an oral history by a woman and maybe anywhere from 100 to 2,000 artifacts connected to her. And so it's in this sort of digital kind of little package. Each woman has a collection. In some cases, there's an oral history without a collection if the woman didn't have items to share. In some cases, there's a collection without an oral history. And in those cases, it's often scholars who have done this work to write books, and they have collections of artifacts. And so we're encouraging them to donate their artifacts to us so they don't get just lost in a file cabinet, which so often happens. A central part of this is our national collaboratory, in which we promote partnerships with libraries, scholars, research institutes, community organizations, and cyber infrastructure specialists to support the production, development, and dissemination of new scholarship on the history of women of color in the civil rights era. Our primary collaboration is with UIUC, the Institute for Computing and Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences. They have developed the Medici Platform that we use. The platform is a very interesting and useful platform because it enables users to access a single platform from anywhere in the world, but it also enables women, teachers, scholars to upload from remote sites into the platform. And indeed, when we go do oral histories, we can upload on site into the digital platform. So you can upload from multiple points, and those of you, if there's any archivists out there, this is important because what we're essentially doing is crowdsourcing ingestion, what's called ingestion, which means if you run an archive, you may go out and collect a woman's archival collection, but that's just one point of ingestion, right? In this model, we might be working with scholars in California, New York, Miami, who would be working on their own projects like Somos Latinas or Chicana Chicago, and those materials are ingested from their sites. They don't have to come through us, right? Ideally, where we'd like to be is like in a place where women who have materials can directly upload them and we can process them so that it decreases the expenses of us having to go to different places. A really essential part of any digital project is community collaboration and public history. So it's not enough, right, to have things on the web. We are very interested in partnering with community organizations either to document and archive their materials, so working with them to make sure that their materials don't just get, dumped when they lose funding, right? And so digitizing their materials, working with scholars locally to do that work, hopefully with classrooms, but also producing materials for the public that are not just online, right? And so we've done two major partnerships, one with El Museo del Norte, which is a public history project in Detroit that I also run. That's why we have a partnership with them. It works out. I taught a class, and that class partnered with a Designing for Exhibitions class the following semester. So in my class, we collected oral histories. I'll talk a little bit about that later. But we collected oral histories from 4 women in Michigan in 2013. And then the Designing for Exhibitions class took our materials and created, in collaboration with the first class, this exhibit called Las Rebeldes, Stories of Strength and Struggle in Southeastern Michigan, which was a pop-up exhibit shown in downtown Detroit. Our next project is we collected an amazing collection of around roughly 2,000 snapshots by Nancy de los Santos, who at the time was a Chicana photographer in Chicago. She photographed the Chicano movement throughout the Midwest. She also went to the IWY in Mexico City in 1975, and she took some of the only known photographs of that conference, that world-changing conference. There's a lot of talk in Chicano visual cultural studies, especially of the movement era, that there were no Chicana photographers. When we interviewed Nancy, she said, I have a few things for you to scan. She came to our apartment in LA, and she had 2 boxes filled with 2,000 snapshots of the Chicano movement. And I was like, well, there were Chicana photographers. It's just that they didn't have credits under the photos. So a lot of the editors of those newspapers, who were almost always men, took credits for the photography. So what we're organizing is this traveling show. Actually, we hope to make it a traveling show with the Designing for Exhibitions class called Disruptive Visualities of Nancy de los Santos, where we're going to show some of her pictures from the 70s. And this is also an El Museo del Norte project. We have also created a public website where curations that provide an interactive access point to the oral histories, material culture, and secondary sources that document the development of the Chicana feminist thought can be housed. And this one I know will work, although because of, okay, here, I'm going to go back here. So this is our website. It's a little, this doesn't actually reflect the website because of mirroring questions, so I want to show you a curation. These are the curations. So what our students do, oh, it is coming up perfectly. So what they do is they go into the collection, they they listen to an oral history, and they look at all the materials in the collection, and then they are tasked with writing usually the first biography of this woman. And sometimes they create these lovely video timelines where they take clips and they have a timeline of her life. So you can see these are like curations where, for example, there's a good one here. I will show you. Olivia Puentes Reynolds. Where the students pull documents that interest them and they write the oral history. This is a syllabus for women's studies and socialist feminism, that's a class that she took in 1971, I think. So, and this is a multi-page document. So that's really cool. Anyway, so the website is actually very important because it has become a major way for us to teach with the archive, right? The archive sits behind a login. It's protected, it's login protected. And so, and that there's reasons for that. We sign releases with the women. They own the copyright to their images and their stories. If scholars want to use those images or stories, they have to seek permission from the women. So we have to keep it behind a firewall. But the public website allows for students to do research in the archive and create public content to give the public, the general public, an understanding of what is in the archive. Eventually, we're expanding to create a kind of essay section for the website so that they can write not just about women but about events or organizations, so they can start doing more networked research beyond a single woman's collection, but start thinking about what, you know, how many X number of women might have been involved in a given political organization or event. And so the idea is to use it as a teaching tool and an interface. And I'll finish up here. Students have always been a really essential part of the Chicana por Mi Raza project. They went with us on our first interviews. This is a picture of our interview with Pepita Martinez, a giant of the civil rights period, with our students in her backyard. This was in the Bay Area. This is one of our students scanning buttons, if you can imagine. Look how many there are. That was only one box. And also, we've taken the work we do independently with students as independent researchers and created classes out of them. And that's where I'm going to sort of hand it off. This is one of the classes is in 2013 at Elena Herrada's house. Students do public presentations based on what they learn about these histories. This was just this last fall at Juana Gonzalez's house. We interviewed her. She was part of the Chicano student movement at University of Michigan. Ana Cardona, Puerto Rican woman, very involved in culture and arts. She started the Raza Media Art Collective in 1974. So the students are actively uncovering these histories and sharing them with the public. It's an extremely powerful educational experience for them, and they are becoming the sort of active producers of the archive. They're helping us collect it, so they're doing the kind of work that a scholar or a graduate student might do, and many of them have actually gone on to graduate school, either in library science or history or American studies or women's studies, as a result of their kind of active engagement, this encuentro with the past. So I'll leave it there. You got 5 minutes.
Thank you. This is how it works with us. You have 5 minutes. I'm going to talk a lot, and then you have 5 minutes. It's okay, though. So I love you.
I introduced it.
That's fine. Okay, so then I am going to take 5 minutes and just talk a little bit. When I first began to think about what I would say today, I thought about how we, Maria Tess and I, are the connections between our students and this history. Just as bridges connect bodies of land that are separated by bodies of water, so do we do the work of connecting these students to these stories created 30 or 40, 50 years earlier of pioneering Chicanas, Latinas, and Latinas in Wisconsin and the rest of the country. Well, I know the history of us and the work that we do in these projects. I know that it wasn't until I began to think about this talk that I really considered that we as a body of women, even now in this center, at this talk, are all connected to each other, and how it is through these connections that we will build these networks of activism, just as our mothers, Martha and Ruth, then Rhea, did almost 44 years earlier in the small town of South Bend, Indiana, at the invitation of Jane Gonzalez. Juanita, she Americanized it to Jane. Ruth always tells the story of Jane Gonzalez, the first Latina to be elected to the state office in Michigan, a city councilwoman in Muskegon Heights, Michigan. A campaign waged with little resources but much determination. So they had no money, but they had these bags and this stencil kit, and they, on the bags, stenciled "Vote for Jane," and would go to these political rallies where all these other candidates who had money had buttons and stuff, and people needed something to carry them in. And so they'd be walking around at these things with these bags that said "Vote for Jane," and Jane wins. Jane actually wins the election because everybody knows who Jane is. And so so Jane, the mother of 10, wins this election, then begins working with the Midwest Council of La Raza, which was as part of the partido, was this national, this Midwest regional political education organization out of Notre Dame, right? Jane already knows about my mother, who is running for Congress at this point. This is 1971, 72. Who's running for a congressional seat in Illinois against the Daily Machine, and if you know anything about Chicago politics, that's just a death wish. And Mother did receive death threats, and we had Teamster bodyguards. She had Teamster bodyguards for the extent of the election, which was one of the reasons I never. I'm sorry. You good? Okay. I'm trying to we got a note to say stand away from the microphone so that we could get pictures. So if you're good, okay. So Mother runs for Congress, gets death threats, she gets bodyguards, and that's when I, at 12 years old, decide, yeah, I'm not doing this. This is a little too much personal sacrifice for anyone's life. And, really, really shy away from being an activist. And it isn't until I'm in my 40s that I make this call to Maria, and then we start working together. So the point of this story and how I'm getting to my connection to Tess is that it is this process of connecting and weaving and conversations that create these other conversations that create these revolutions. Because what we're doing is a revolution. I mean, that's probably the best way to describe this. We are not just reintroducing or introducing, I would love to say reintroducing, introducing these stories and this history back into the narrative. We are very much like our mothers, making spaces where spaces refuse to be made. I say that because for 7 years we have worked on this project as a labor of love with resources that we have begged, borrowed, or stolen. Well, I don't say we've stolen it. We haven't really stolen anything. In a metaphorical. Occasionally borrowed. We did give back. How's that? To make this happen. I can't imagine that two other people could feel this responsibility to do this because our mothers worked together in the movement, remained friends, and we became friends because of this. And so, you know, in a way we're sort of following this parallel trajectory, right? In that we're still doing this work. Our mothers are extremely proud of us, and of course his mother's extremely critical, but that's another story. And so I was actually going to talk more about some other things, but I'm going to just jump over so Tess has enough time to talk about Somos. So long story short, my mother gets involved in national politics, becomes the first vice chair of the National Women's Political Caucus, a fact that not very many Latinas know, and is in this whole sort of kerfluffle at the beginning of the caucus, of the National Women's Political Caucus, that involves the election process, because she is first vice chair. Audrey Roe-Colon, who's an African-American Republican woman, is second vice chair. And so the political arm of the women's liberation movement has as two significant members of the elected body women of color, a story most young women do not know. And so one of the reasons I was so distraught in '77 was because I knew these stories to be true. I had lived through all of this and knew the significant contributions that women of color had given, not just in '77, but in '73, in '74, in '75, and in '76, leading up to '77. And so I understood at that point that it was my responsibility as the legacy of this to make that revolution happen. And it's been a joyful journey. It's been a frustrating journey, but it's been a joyful journey to work with Maria on this, with this understanding that this is our responsibility. It is every one of our responsibilities to reclaim these spaces, to claim these spaces, and in instances reclaim these spaces, not just for our histories of women of color, but all of our women that were involved in these movements, especially in the Midwest, because we were very involved. I feel like a broken record coming from Chicago and talking about Jane. It's like, hello, Jane came out of Chicago. The Chicago Women's Liberation Front came out of Chicago. I mean, all of these organizations came out of the Midwest. We have a significant influence in this history, and that's not being documented. And so I say to all of you, as a challenge, take that on. Meet someone, know someone in your community, because someone in your community was involved in the women's movement. If there are mothers' ages or younger, 60 and up, they had some involvement in the movement in some kind of a way. If they were in college, they definitely had some kind of an involvement. An aunt, a mother, a grandmother. You have family that was involved in this movement. I guarantee it, because there was no other conversation in the 70s for women than the women's liberation movement. Okay, and on that note, I'm going to talk about Tess for a second. So, how I meet Tess. I come here for the 35th anniversary of Women's Chicano Latino program, right? It was the introduction. And I come here because my friend Petra Guerra, who at the time was the assistant director, of the program, said, come up here and come and see what we're doing. You might get some information about some women. Because I knew there was activism in Wisconsin, I just didn't have any clue, right? So I hear Sylvia Garcia, who's part of the program, talk about the development of the department and how they marched and protested on the Capitol and all this other stuff. And I hear Ramona Villarreal talk about being a brown beret and being in the UFW. Well, of course, I call my compatriot in crime like, oh my God, you will not believe what's going at the lunch. You will not believe what's going on. We got to get up here to interview. But how, right? No money, Wisconsin. Who's got time? We've already got our research trips planned. And so after lunch, this, 180-mile-an-hour Cat 5 hurricane gets up and starts talking. And I leaned over to my friend Petra and I said, who is that? And she said, that's Tess. And I said, we really need to come up here and interview these women. Do you think Tess would help us? Do you think she'd be interested in helping us out? And she said, if anybody can help you, Tess can help you. And so I introduced myself. And Tess, operating at that, unbelievable speed, was processing what I was saying and already coming up with a plan. And she says, come with me outside. And she sort of ran outside. And I ran after her in April with no coat. Never forget this. Well, I wasn't going to tell that part of the story, but okay. And we get outside, and Tess is, kind of smoking and thinking and smoking and thinking. And I'm just kind of standing there waiting. And then out of her mouth comes the beginnings of the Somos Latinas project. So my request for 2 interviews turns into this oral history collective that she's going to talk about. That is the Somos Latinas project with a class, with resources, with all the people she needs to get in touch with to make this happen, including, recruiting students and da-da-da-da. And I'm like, okay, it was just 2 interviews. So I'm thinking to myself, and you can come in the fall to talk about how we're related to your project. So this was April, and in August, right? No, it was right after Labor Day. I came for the first Somos Latinas class. That's how fast that happened. But that is Tess. And so I say that to say that it has also been an honor to be a part of your, incredibly accelerated world because...
I'm going to pull her thing up.
Oh, okay, because of the way, go ahead, because of the way you approach, this is how we work too.
Sorry.
You're fine.
I'm just doing the tech.
Of the way we've always approached this work, I actually had to email Maria and say, okay, I can't work on any national stuff right now till we solve some of these problems and figure out how to make this happen, because there's so many questions I hadn't even considered in doing a state-based project, right? But Tess made it happen. Tess continues to make this happen. And every time I come up here, it is some other just amazing facet that she's introducing. So I'm going to leave on this note, right? And I'm not going to embarrass you like Maria did. I was over there in tears. You just have to know, because I had totally forgotten I'd written that email to Maria. And didn't realize, and I knew what a profound moment that was for me, but I didn't realize quite how prophetic that turned into. Yeah, don't tell me anymore. I was like, oh, please, God, don't let me start crying up here. My mother will never forgive me, right? So 2 years ago, I said to Tess, well, we really do need to interview you for the project. And she said, no, that's too self-serving. I'm all about the work. I was like, no, you're at the heart of all of this. You are a connector. You are a bridge. So we finally got her to agree to do it. And I had to agree. She had to do it in a way that would fundraise. That was one thing, right? And that would call attention to the project so that other young people would know about it. And so what happened was we shot the interview over 2 nights. Maria came in and moderated. And it was actually a conversation between the two of them. It was a wonderful evening. We showed clips of the work that Tess has done as an award-winning poet. And when I reached out to women, Chicanos across the country, to ask them if they would perform these works, no one turned me down. They read the works and said, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Yes. And I'm talking about women like Koya Paz out of Chicago. Tanya Sarachos, who, if you don't know, is a, yes, I'm almost done. This is a good story. I'm almost done. Was a writer on how to get away with murder. And so, and Teatro Chicano actually did 2 pieces for us. And so everyone agreed to do it. Larry is in one of the pieces too, the director of Latino Studies at Michigan. My point being is Tess is the model of bridge building, coalition building. I know, see? Yeah, I know. Stop, okay. And continues to inspire my work and me in everything she does here. And so I am just grateful for meeting you and getting to be a part of this amazing world with you. Hit it. Your turn. Tag your it. Thank you.
I got you set up.
Never without surprises. Linda and Maria. It goes without saying that we've all become family across the Midwest and even nationally. And so I have two things for you this morning. The first, from the Chicano Studies program, the certificate is awarded one to each, to Linda Garcia Merchant and Maria Cotera in appreciation for their leadership, guidance, commitment to the Somos Latina History Project of Wisconsin.
Thank you.
And the icing on the cake for each of you is a letter, and I will read. And this is one addressed to each of them. In this case, Linda. I am pleased to recognize your tremendous contribution to the University of Wisconsin-Madison Chicano Studies program. Your knowledge has been an invaluable asset and your work influential in the success of this field. Your mentorship on the Somos Latina Digital History Project has been key to the success of UW Chicano Studies program. Your Chicana por Mi Raza project has had an invaluable impact on our communities, educating and raising awareness of a vital part of our nation's history. I am therefore delighted that your efforts and hard work are being recognized. Thank you for your remarkable dedication to the field of Chicano studies. I wish you all the best in your continued important work. Sincerely, Tammy Baldwin, United States Senator. Like,
Wow. This is even better than chocolate.
okay. Well, we don't have much time, and so I need a hint here. How far can I go?
11:05.
Got it. Okay, I'm going to start out with one clip, and then we'll just go from there, okay? This is raw footage. It's not edited. Do we have any sound here?
Oh, no. I'll work on it. You talk.
Okay, so this is Maria Morales. She is from Racine, 75, from Pupila.
And I was introduced to him, and so I says, oh, Paul Ryan, a congressman. And that's how I was pretty involved with the School of Americas, getting people to sign up to go to the rally in November. And so I asked him, as a congressman, don't you think that's wrong, that we are educating people to be torturers from other countries and sending them back there? He said, no, we're not doing that. We don't do that. And he was pretty defensive. He didn't want to talk about it. So I started to study him a little bit and see what his issues were. And then I got involved with Nuestra at that time, that he was pretty anti-immigrant. I started going to his rallies. I started going to his forums. He did a forum for Hispanic issues, and I tried to ask questions, but I realized I was getting any answers. And other people asked questions, and nobody answers. And I went to some of his hearings, and the only one who heard was him. He didn't hear us. So I started getting involved in the immigrant issue, and we had a forum where at first he was sort of pro the DREAM Act, and all of a sudden, before 1910, it was for the DREAM Act. After that, he decided he wasn't going to talk about it anymore. He had to study it. I asked him why wasn't he supporting the DREAM Act. He said, well, it's too complicated right now, and I find that I have to study it before I can make up my mind, and this is something I would support at this time. So later on, we had another rally, and I wanted that question answered. I wanted a yes or no. So I asked this young girl if she would ask the question, because at one point he stopped asking me when I raised my hand. So I asked this girl if she would ask the question. So I raised my hand to him, and he called me. I was surprised. So I told her, I'm going to give the floor to this young lady over here from Holyoke High School. And he just, same answer. He never gives an answer where he says that yes or no. He goes into all his spiel about everything else except that.
Okay, Maria Morales of Racine, Wisconsin, one of 45 Chicana Latina activists interviewed in the state of Wisconsin by the Chicano Studies students enrolled in my courses over a 4.5-year period, including summers. I'm very excited to say that out of the 85 students of Chicano Studies with a certificate minor, 70 of them have participated, and many of them repeatedly throughout the entire project. So this project has really touched the students in ways that I had not anticipated. Chicano Studies is notoriously small classes. Don't tell that to the budget shop. But my last class was 29, and I had to scurry to find additional women to interview because of this overwhelming popularity amongst the students. One of the mottos that I heard in the 70s as I was contemplating as a late bloomer to going to college was an ad in a magazine, and it showed a cave dweller with fire, and it said, in every society there is someone who questions. And I went, yeah, that's me. Well, the new Somos version is, in every community there are women who question and then take action. And Maria is one of those women. So one of the stories that I really enjoy about Maria is that, you know, trying to identify women. My biggest regret is I couldn't reach all the women we've identified, and more work needs to be done. That hurts very deeply. The other pain is the pain of our comadres who have passed before us and were taken away from us, including Aurora Ware from Milwaukee, and that we never will have a chance to hear their voices. But Maria, I found her by searching the internet, and I found a right-wing website that monitored the activity of activists of color. And they profiled Maria and had almost every march, sit-in, civil disobedience action she's ever taken in this report. So I naturally thought, I got to find her. Well, long story short, it took about 5 different levels of investigation to finally find her in Racine and get her to agree. One of my favorite parts of her activism was, we asked her about Paul Ryan. This is before he was speaker. She sent him 200 empty milk cartons that were quite smelly when he cut the WIC program budget. Then he refused to meet with her. So at 74, she went online to move.org and had a national petition, and Brad Pitt signed the petition demanding Paul Ryan meet with Maria. She got the meeting. This is just the tip of the iceberg of the women that we've interviewed. We've done work with Chicanas, Mexicana immigrants, Puerto Ricanas from both the island-born and mainland-born. There is a difference. And Latin American immigrants in Wisconsin. We focused on 9 cities, with the urban hubs being the richest sites for at least identifying women. My regret is in some of the smaller cities with a long-standing Latino population, we were only able to get in 1, and that just doesn't feel right. And there's more work to be done. I think the part that is so exciting is that, as Maria's done in her class, is that this was all done by our students. What I am professionally, I call myself the matchmaker, the yenta. I find and I bring together. That's my job, as opposed to do the dirty work of these interviews. So my job was to identify the women. And I was blessed with an advisory committee that I put together. And that's an aspect of Somos that is this collaboration model. I could not envision myself being in charge of identifying women and putting them, retrofitting them into history on my own. You know, we have tunnel vision even though we don't want to admit it. So I put together a community advisory board of fellow activist women that I used to run with. So Dr. Yolanda Garza from the, Yolanda, stand up. Yolanda Garza from the Madison campus, one of the founding members of Latina Task Force, the Wisconsin Hispanic Council on Higher Ed when we were fighting for Nez Flores to become a region. Eloisa Gomez, Latina Task Force. Barbara Medina, Latina Task Force. And Jonathan Nelson from the Wisconsin Historical Society, Karen Herrera from Madison Public Schools. One of the outcomes, there are many outcomes of Somos. Naturally, the raw footage is housed at Chicanas por Mi Raza. I'm pleased to say that the data is already being used by students. Arturo Diaz in his McNair scholarship research paper. I've never done one. Maria had to coach me on how to mentor him. I'm a poet and politician. You know, I came to academia very late in my career. So Arturo Diaz used the raw footage. He focused on 5 Chicanas from Milwaukee and did his own research in addition to using that raw data. So that's one product. We've had students change their majors. We've had students say that now that they understand the value of qualitative research, they are looking at graduate school, which was one of my primary foci as long as I've been teaching on this campus is, will you become faculty? I don't care what you do. You think about everything else, but think about faculty first, because faculty control the knowledge. They are the knowledge machine. So that's another outcome. We're working on a phase 2, and that's with Eloisa Gomez from UW Extension and myself, where we conducted additional interviews, a subset of 30 of the 45. And we have a book contract with Wisconsin Historical Society Press coming out in 2017. I'm also looking to work with Buena Vista Productions, with Juan Mario in Milwaukee, and with a documentary. And then Karen Herrera will be developing lesson plans, which we will use for K-12 education. Because now that we have identified women in 9 cities, there is no excuse for our absence in history. Other spin-offs have been interest in both Sheboygan and Racine for a Los Primeros project, in which, as if I don't have enough to do in retirement, working on documenting the first families in Sheboygan and Racine. So Patricia, perhaps, there's something we can talk about there. So it's snowballed and snowballed and snowballed. But the students, as I said, I'm the yenta, they're the production people. They did the research in the Historical Society for each woman. They framed the interview questions. They framed them. All I did was edit or say, would you want to say it this way? But they framed the questions. They edited the DVDs in any creative way they wanted to. Standardization was out the window. Then the DVDs are produced and will be housed along with 20 women's archival collections that are all going into the Somos Latina collection. So the transcripts, the students did transcripts, video footage, video editing, reflection journals, and a host of other tasks. They presented at national conferences on their work. Many of the students have been told in their graduate interviews their research requirement for a course or 2 were waived as a result of their continued involvement for the past 4 years in Somos. So I couldn't be more delighted in terms of learner impact, but in terms of documenting or retrofitting Chicana Latinas in our history, that was our primary goal. Maria and Linda are the offspring of dynamic Chicana activists. I am the offspring of a Chicano activist. It runs in our blood, but they're far too modest about their role. Again, Maria's helped me on the academic side. I had her write a book chapter. I compared two women in their 70s, and Maria was fabulous. Linda worked for 2 years every semester. She would come to my class on her own nickel, because we have no money until later, and trained my students and connected the dots between Chicana por mi raza and Somos Latinas. We've had a significant amount of campus support financially, diversity office, pathways, mortgage center, College of Letters and Science, etc. Chicano studies. But the entire Somos Latina project rests on the sweat of our youth. When the Patriot Act was passed, I asked, and I wasn't saying it in polite language, where's the revolution? Well, after 10 years on the Madison campus, working with these students and others, I can say the revolution is here, and the revolution is now. The past 5 years of students have been more politically informed, active, and progressive than I've seen in 30 years, since the days of the Chicano movement. This delights me to no end, because now, with that kind of enthusiasm, we have the life stories of women that can also be shared with these young activists. I'd like to show one more clip, and then we'll open it up, because there's so much we could talk about. All right. Where is it? Come on.
Oh, it's just a...
There, right. Here we are on set. Richie, see the boy on camera? This kid has been involved for 4.5 years. Every time my drivers in a van collapsed, canceled, Richie took the wheel and he, cleared his schedule to get us. That's 48 road trips we took with students. The things I learned, I'll write a book about just that. I learned about trip hop, dubstep, house music, here we are. They are interviewing Eloisa, Daisy Cubias, and another group of students. This, Maria Cruz. Maria, in her 70s, had no less than 12 boxes of archives, and we were able to go through 3 of them. But we actually had laptops all around the table, and every time we found something, there was another story she could give us about that. So we just set up the camera and said, tape everything and don't swear. Because everything was a new pearl of wisdom, or another cuento, another story about activism and her history. So Maria was just an amazing archivist in her own right. Here we are in Chicago with Yolanda Yubi, Latin American woman. Here we do Carmen. Now, Carmen de la Paz is from Waukesha, also 74, Puerto Riqueña island born. Her father was a union organizer as well as very active in island politics. And Carmen grew up in that environment. Carmen came with 4 or 5 brothers, and she was the only girl. Her father bought her professional boxing gloves at the age of 4 and taught her to box, because he said, my daughter will know how to take care of herself. Well, fast forward, Carmen talks about some of her life as an activist and the implications within the family.
Somos Latina Project, Carmen de la Paz, take 3.
So during this time frame, as I spent a lot of walkouts, organizations, people getting together to fight for the students and the children's educational rights. As a woman organizer, are there certain obstacles that you may have faced that maybe would have been easier for a man to do, or things that you remember that you had to take initiative to do?
Okay, a lot of the activists were more men, okay? More men because at that time the women usually stay at home and they were not allowed to, raise their voice. And remember, I'm coming from 5 boys at home, so I always have to have my voice heard. And it was a lot of obstacles were, our own leaders as men, because they want to be in front, so we have to be their followers. So they saw if they saw me as a threat, because the macho image, the woman stay behind. Of course, it's always a woman behind a successful man. Okay, let's remember that. And I did have many obstacles. I used to work at La Casa still, but at home. My biggest obstacle that I had as a woman, as an activist, as a fighter, was at home was my husband. My husband, he was also from Puerto Rico, and it was, oh my gosh, he was not able to understand, he couldn't understand how come I have to go and fight. How come I have to go and, talk or say whatever. I'm going to tell you one thing. We used to belong to a church group, and we used to go to meetings, and when we left home, he said to me, don't talk in the meeting. You be quiet in the meeting, okay? And me being used to, so it was hard for me. So I said, I got to do something. I don't know what I'm going to do. So one day during the meeting, I go in the little to my ex-placo here in Waukesha. And one time in the meeting, I started talking, and he kicked me under the table. And then I kept talking, and he kicked me again, and I said, why are you kicking me? To him. I want him to be embarrassed, because are you kicking me because I'm talking? So that was the end of that. In that meeting, okay? But going back to Waukesha, it was very hard for me. It was very hard for me. I left home at night for meetings. I was scared to get home, to go back, because I knew that he was going to be upset. He was not going to talk to me. And one day I remember, because I was so active as I belonged to every board in Waukesha. And he told me, okay, this is set. Or you choose home, or you choose outside. But you cannot have both. And I didn't want to lose either one. I need my job. I need to keep fighting outside, but I also need my husband and my kids because I love them. So I have to came with the conclusion that I have to bring him with me. Okay, I have to. Pretending that he was going to be in front, but it was not that way. But little by little, I started involving him in my things, and then eventually he was very, very involved. Not in what I was doing also, but outside, but within the community. He became very, very active, and he became very supportive of me. And now, I was not walking by myself. I was not fighting by myself. I have my husband with me. And also, when my kids, especially my daughter, when she started getting older, she joined me too. So it came to a point that the whole family was working, was activist, in the community, and fighting for our children. It took me a while. There were, times that it was rough at home. He was a good man. He was a good provider, a good husband, and I love him.
All right. Carmen is so undervalued. This was one of those women that, if I do anything, she has to be part of this. And it leads me to a point, because we're out of time, and that is, this is an exciting database that Chicanas por Mi Raza has put together with almost now hundreds of women, oral histories. The largest database in the nation on Chicana Latina activism. In the world. Whoa. And we are its first state project, and now they have projects in Chicago, Michigan, and other places will develop. The one thing I ask you to please understand is this is not meant to essentialize any of these brown women as a strong brown woman at the expense of la familia y los niños, all of it. Every woman we interviewed, when you asked them the definition of community activist, said it's someone who works with the community, for the community, is part of the community, variations of that. But it was always in the context of community and familia. They were not forced, as some of the second wave Anglo-feminists were, to make a choice between politics, activism, and family. They did it all. And they held jobs while they were doing it. So please understand, this is not an opportunity to essentialize us as strong brown women at the expense of our strong brown men. That is the difference in the feminist model that we use. I look forward to talking to you more about what we've done. I want to give a shout out to any students here who worked on the project. Stand up, please. Come on, come on, come on, come on, come on, come on. Hector Salazar, technician. He taught himself iMovie editing and then trained every subsequent class. That's how we did it. And that's how the women did it. They learned as they went. No training. They just learned and shared and kept moving. Thank you.